Hey guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Friday, July 25th, 2025, and I'd like to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research 2 channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. All right, guys. Well, I've got a very interesting story and basically an affirmation about the giant humanoids of the ancient past and what I've been putting forth as as a hypothesis of mine is that these were the people who were the engineers. These were the people who were the ancient stonemasons, and I provided all sorts of you know relatable type evidence to suggest that notion. But again, here the Quran is going to provide us with the affirmation of what these ancient large humanoids were up to. So the reason why this all came about is because I was talking with my housemate and co-worker and good friend Waleed, who is a practicing Muslim, and we were talking on a weekend, and he was telling me about a story about a prophet in Islam who supposedly existed before Abraham. So this is going back far into the times just after Noah, and I think even one of these prophets is a relation of one of Noah's sons, actually. So this is going far, far back into antiquity. So, as I said, I've many times and talked about many times on my channel about the giant humanoids of the past being the stonemasons, being buried in sand, being buried in gravel, always, having something to do with stones, lifting heavy stones, tossing heavy stones, contests of strength, etc., etc. So, we're used to hearing the stories of the giants from the Judeo-Christian vantage point, but unless you're a student of Islam and you read the Quran, you probably wouldn't know any of the stories that is in the Quran about the giants. So I'd like to read a little bit for you about one of these prophets, the prophet that my buddy Wali was telling me about, the story of Salah, Prophet Salah, and the Thamud people. And who were the Thamud people? So let's see a little bit about what the AI says about the Thamud people, and then we'll get back to what is actually said about the Thamud people in the Quran. But so here it says the Thamud were an ancient Arab tribe or group of tribes who lived in the Arabian Peninsula from around the 8th century BCE to the 5th century CE. According to Islamic tradition, they were the people to whom the prophet Salah, a descendant of Sam, son of Noah, was sent to preach the message of monotheism. The Quran portrays the Thamud as having rejected Salah's message and his miraculous she-camel, eventually bringing about their own destruction. They are mentioned multiple times in the Quran, primarily as a lesson against arrogance, polytheism, and rejection of prophets. The location of the Thamud, according to Islamic tradition, is often associated with Al-Hijr, also known as Madain Salah in the Hijaz region of Saudi Arabia. However, the archaeological remains of Madain Salah are primarily from the Nabatean civilization, which existed much later. Pre-Islamic sources confirm the existence of the Thamud. They appear in the annals of the Assyrian king Sargon. So, it's going back, way back in time to the Sumerians. And in Greek and Roman texts where they are referred to as Tumundi. The Talmud also built a temple at Al-Ruwafa in the 160 CE and left rock writings and pictures in Central Arabia. Although these inscriptions are often referred to as Thamudic, it's important to note that this is a term used by scholars to categorize various understudied pre-Islamic writing systems, and there is no definite evidence directly linking the tribe of Thamud to their creation. Okay, so I'm not going to read the whole story to you, but I just find it very interesting what is said about them. Okay, and these are the successors to the people who were there in the region before them, who were called the Ad. Okay, so in the Quran, the people of Ad, also spelled Ad, were an ancient Arab tribe who lived in the southern Arabian Peninsula in a region called Al-Aqaf, the sandy plains. The Quran describes them as powerful and wealthy people known for their skill in architecture and building impressive structures. They were blessed with fertile lands, abundant rain, livestock, and children. Despite their blessings, the people of Ad became arrogant, boastful, and turned away from worshiping Allah. They worshipped idols and defied Allah's commands. They believed their strength and might were unmatched, and they refused to heed the warnings of Prophet Hud, a prophet sent by Allah from amongst them. Okay, so both Prophet Hud and Prophet Salah preach the same thing. They're from those people, so they're not from outside. They were picked by Allah to preach this message within their own culture, according to the Quran. So, but the story of the Ad and the Talmud are virtually the same story, but just with different prophets and at different time periods, being that the Talmud were the successors of the Ad. So it's just interesting to me that, there's no mention of, their size or, strength. And, these are, components of the story in the Quran, which are, part and parcel to understanding about these people. So it's just interesting to me. In this video here, the end of the giants, which is presented by this sort of religious, see, it says right there,
giants, and
their
their strength
bodies
was
were like
legendary.
giants, and their strength was legendary.
But this power led them into arrogance.
Okay.
And
So this is the story of the people of Ad, and they're referring to them as giants. Okay. So here's the story of the prophet Salah, which I'm going to read a little bit to you. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it has a lot to do with this whole spiritual significance of it, which if you're interested in, you can read more about. But I just want to read to you what is said about them, because that's important in my mind, because this is the sort of affirmation of what these people's real talents were, and which is on display for us today if we want to believe the story. Because here is what the structures look like that they're saying, attributing to the people of the Thamud and the Odd people. So this is the structures that even Petra is referred to in here. All these structures built into these mountains, and when you see the doorways on these places, you have to say to yourself, why, you know. they make them so large. Here's an example of the space carved out there, and how big average people are against what this looks like. So in any case, let me read to you just a little bit of the story. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but pay attention to what they're saying about these people. Okay, the story of Prophet Salah. Prophet Salah was the descendant of the great prophet Nuh. May peace be upon him. He was chosen by Allah to help guide the Thamud people. This was an ancient tribe who settled in Al-Hijr, known as Madain Salah, the cities of Salah, located in northwestern Arabia. The Thamud people were successors of the previous community called Ad, as we covered in greater detail in the story of Prophet Hud. The people of Ad were an extremely powerful and wealthy nation. They were built physically strong and tall. They were also excellent builders, constructing lofty towers. But Allah brought their downfall due to their arrogance when they repeatedly rejected Prophet Hud's warnings. So the Ad thought they were greater than God, so they didn't consider Allah, who is greater than their strength, these tall, physically strong people. Okay, the civilization of Ad had completely vanished, leaving no trace of its existence besides what the Quran has mentioned. However, like the pharaoh who left behind the pyramids, the buildings and sites constructed by the people of Thamud still exist as a sign for us today. This is what it says in the Quran. Have you not considered how your Lord dealt with Ad? Iram had lofty pillars, the likes of whom had never been created in the land, and Thamud, who carved out the rocks in the valley, and with Pharaoh, owner of the stakes, all of whom oppressed within the lands and increased therein the corruption. So your Lord poured upon them a scourge of punishment. This could be a reference to what Velikovsky was talking about as far as what kind of catastrophes were going on this planet. Anyway, furthermore, the 15th Surah of the Quran is dedicated after a story titled Surah al-Hijr, meaning the stone or the stone land. So get that. It's meaning the stone or the stone land. Okay, so this is an actual reference to the land where these people existed, the stone or the stone land, okay, similar to that of the mention of the stone giants by the Iroquois Haudenosaunee, right? Who, in this case, we're talking about real things, right? The stone or the stone land, but the stone giants were made of stone or had stone armor. They built with stone. This is what this is talking about here. This is what they're noted for. This is what they're equated with. Stonemasonry, okay? The original stonemasons. And this is what Robert Shaw could be talking about in Voyages of the Pyramid Builders, the civilization that existed in antediluvian times that was inhabited by these giant humanoids, okay? And then later on with sort of master and subject relationships with people of our stature, with these people of high stature being the ruling classes at some point in the ancient past. It probably was for protection of our species or our subspecies that we came about some 200,000 years ago, which sort of indicates, look, the contention was it was just us all along, like what Alice Herdliska believed and called. He figures into this too because you know because of him, even today, nobody takes the giant humanoids who lived in the past seriously. But I do here, certainly, because it's a whole unknown story of the ancient past where when they thought there were nothing but cavemen, there were people carving things out of rock, which, Gobekli Tepe is an example of how this goes a lot further back. This is what the people could do after the cataclysm. Before the cataclysm, who knows what they were doing? Something more like this. Like palaces carved into the living rock. You know, so. But as the society prospered and they achieved material success, they too fell victim to believing in their superiority. Their success led them astray. They built castles, statues, and eventually idols to symbolize their powers. Instead of sharing the abundance they created, they became greedy and cruel to the poor. The Quran mentions their fascination with the worldly life, neglecting the life of the hereafter. It says here in the Quran, do you construct on every elevation a sign, amusing yourselves, and take for yourselves palaces and fortresses that you might abide eternally? Okay, so the rest of the story here is about how Salah, tries to convince them that they should convert to believing in Allah to save their souls, otherwise they're going to be punished. And just as the people of Ad were punished in a similar fashion, these people were also punished because they did not see clear enough to join up. But obviously, some of the tall, muscular people survived because Salah did, and the people who followed him, and so did Hud. And the people who follow him, they survived. Just like the Frisians survived. Okay, that the Giants genocide, and I'm sure this is alluding to the Giant genocide.
Nature, after
This just something I was saying in the video. We'll go back to that because I keep on talking about this, and here it is in the Quran affirming what I've talked about all along.
just recently, because I have no teeth, and
Talking about Popeye, how I
said, well, why not, man? We all know that Popeye's like one of the strongest guys that ever lived, and he eats his spinach, he gives everybody a beat down, so it's pretty cool to be Popeye.
So here's
those readers who have been to the north of the
article.
Netherlands before and stepped into a local bar in, let's say, the villages of Wamels or Bierum, they might have felt impressed and unsecure to be surrounded by giants. To order a beer means the bar counter is at your chest level, at the very least, and they do not even bother to go to the men's toilet. Impossible to reach it unless you take a crutch with you or have one of the giants to give you a lift. Ask them. They are used to helping out smaller people. Above that, the giants also make a lot of noise when they drink, which you cannot decipher either. But don't fear, they are all really as big and as friendly as their dozy, hornless Holstein Friesian cows. As to why dwellers of the Wadden Sea region are so tall is still unclear to biologists. Isn't that interesting? It's still unclear. That's right, it's still unclear. And, you can hear more about that on my channel in plenty of videos. Of course, it is genetic and food has some influence too, but why the feature height became such a strong gene in the evolutionary selection process, they haven't figured out yet. Have Frisian women maybe a preference for tall men? And if so, why? It is tempting to simply suggest that the dwellers of the tidal marshes literally had to keep their heads above the water during the many great storm floods. And if not during the storm floods, tallness was needed to stick out of the sucking mud of the salt marshes and more inland out of the treacherous fenlands.
Okay, so anyway, I read from this travel blog where this journalists looked into it, and they don't know why the Frisian people are the way they are. Their skeletal anatomy is different. The shapes of their skull is different. Okay, these are the things that Alex Hurtler was talking about with subhuman peoples and all kind of stuff like that. He knew all about the giants. He just said you can't have these ancient peoples of the past inventing stonemasonry, engineering, metallurgy, just like the Belgica people, and brought metallurgy with them, farming with them, all the things that are necessary for a more advanced type of society wasn't invented by us. It was given to us by these large, tall people. It's according to mainstream history. This is not a secret or anything like that. Okay, here the Quran is referring to these people who are stonemasons of the ancient past who are tall and strong peoples. Well, we know all about the Belgica people and their mound builders, just like the Frisian people here. Were also mound builders who survived to present day, still there. Okay, whereas they got rid of the Watusi because they hold the key to what the past actually looked like the Adena and the Hopewell, and Alice Shurtlish didn't want anybody to know about that. See, that what the anthropologists and archaeologists today don't understand is that they don't have to follow that thread anymore. Okay, Alice Shurtlish has been disgraced. His theories have been put to rest. It can't be what he said. It couldn't be back then. As the story goes on and more information, now we know that whatever he said was complete nonsense. This is now how the past goes, and certainly if the Giants figure heavily into what sort of things they contributed to our culture from the past, well, Hurliska didn't want anybody to know about that. Okay, it's supposed to be us. But at that time, Herdliska didn't know that we're some sort of amalgamation of Neanderthal and other types of humanoids from the past. And I certainly went over tons of different kinds of humanoids from that they dug up, the Boscopoid people, all this kind of stuff with weird skeleton shapes and whatnot. But I'm just saying here, like I said many times, how did these people, besides being able to carve out the rock out of a sheer mountainside. Well, if you want somebody to make blocks for you, well, this is the kind of people you're going to hire to do the work, okay? And you're going to use slings to do it, okay? Again, I've gone over on my channel. How did the pyramids get built? Well, if this is how they got built, except multiply these people who are average height 5'8", 5'9", 6 foot maybe or whatever it is. So you got 8 and 9 and 10 foot tall skeletal remains from the past. Okay, so think about what they could lift with slings, with moving slings. Okay, so yes, ancient peoples utilized various forms of straps for moving objects. Of course they did. Okay, this is how the blocks were moved around. Okay, and it seems to me that we're again, and I mentioned this on my other channel and this channel, we're always thinking about how we did these things. When here you are, the Quran's trying to tell you who did these things. People who were tall and strong like the giants. Okay, the giant skeletal remains dug up from the ancient past with thick bones and strong tendons indicating, musculature, etc. Not like these people with giantism and acromegaly who have all these problems because this is what you get when you cross giant humanoid species with regular size species people. This is why all the prohibitions to commingling with them come from many cultures of the past that have gone over on this channel. Okay, they saw what the outcome was. They realized that after it happened a couple of times, and then of course they had to stop that. And of course, eventually they had to get rid of all the giants that occurred at different times at different places around the planet as it progressed, because this is what naturally was going to occur. Like I said, you're gonna have your two 12-year olds at the bus stop. One's 6 foot tall or more, and you're 5 foot 1, 2 kid, 12-year old at the bus stop, and they're gonna have a fight. I don't think so. Okay, so we had to get rid of them for because they couldn't be trusted to live alongside us. So that's why they were eliminated. Besides the fact that, like it's saying in the Qur'an here, it's probably similar fashion to the Adena and the Hopewell culture, because these were all trading cultures. All of these cultures were trading cultures. Some people got rich, and some people used their power for ill purposes, which is inevitably what happens in these complex societies that have strong economies based on trade and wealth getting and all kind of other stuff. So look, I'm just pointing out what it says in the Quran here about these people, the Thamud people and the people of Ad, being, they were built physically strong and tall. Okay, and just like it says in this article about the Frisians, okay, about how science can't explain their height or their skeletal anatomy or anything. Okay, they can't explain it. All right, just like they can't explain the giants of the past. So therefore, they'd rather them go away so they don't have to see what the history of our past actually is, and how different humanoid species from the past figure heavily into it, and how we only received all these skills and then expounded upon them, but we're not the originators of it. See, that's a story that people like Alice Hurtliska want to avoid. See, so that's why he declared there was no such thing as giants. But now what we know about Hurtliska being disgraced and discredited as he is, we can comfortably say, and what we know of the recording of the actual archaeology from the Bureau of Ethnology from the time periods concerned, of them digging up these skeletal remains, these giant skeletal remains, again, can't be explained. Just like it says here in this article about the Frisian people. Cannot be explained. We should all be the same, relatively the same size if we're all one species, supposedly. You see, so they're omitting and leaving out pertinent facts from the past, wherever they might come from. Okay, and we're not getting the full story about who's who, but again, here's an affirmation from the Quran about what the giant peoples of the past were all about. Engineering, like the earthen structures and mounds and all kind of stuff, and you know, uh, they were talking about how the Frisians in this article had to get clay for their mounds, to make the mounds, last over time. Again, how these structures are engineered. It's just not dirt like Cahokia. When the people found those pyramids later on and tried to repair it just by using dirt, the whole thing sagged and fell apart because they weren't the people who built it. They didn't know it was built out of engineered soil. They just figured it was built out of plain old dirt. So this is what tells you the people that they talk about were the originators of Cahokia aren't. They didn't know what they were doing. If they built the pyramids, they certainly knew how to repair them. Why would that knowledge be lost of the Prada, the type of engineering Prada that was designed to build the mounds, just like they are wherever they are in the world? You know, they're engineered to last by building them out of mixed materials and other materials to, you know, fortify their structure. Okay, it's not just simply dirt. And I think that's what a lot of people have the impression when they hear about mounds and all kind of stuff. It's just a lump of dirt that survived all the time. Well, no, it's not. It's been engineered by people with a genius for engineering, whether it be working with, earth, sand, or gravel, or cut stone, or irregular stone building. They were well versed in all of those things, whether it be the stone giants of upstate New York and New York, where most of the stone walls in northeastern North America can be found in New York, okay, where the stone giants were, okay, just like these people, and their city is called the Stone or Stone Land, okay? And just like the Pharaoh left the pyramid, the Damu left their buildings for us. The stone, Sarah al Hijir, meaning the stone or the stone land. Was the land made of stone, or does stone land refer to a place because it has to do with the working of stone, right? So, just like the stone giants have to do with the working of stone, they're not made out of stone or have stone coats, all kind of stuff. This is what you think about it when you think about it from a child's perspective, okay? You all know this means something else. So, anyway, I just thought I might bring this to your attention about the Quran and the large people of the ancient past and what they were best at, stonemasonry. And not only did this work, for their own people and everything, as I'm sure they contracted out to anybody who had money and wanted something built of stone, out of huge stones, cyclopean stones, whatever. They were going to move it all. They knew how to do it and could do it at their size with sheer physical strength, one way or another. All different kinds of methods that we would be unable to do at our size. See? But at a different size, that changes things quite a bit. You see? How the work could be done physically changes everything. And unless you're that size with that sort of strength and all that kind of stuff, how could you ever possibly imagine how it was done? You know? But maybe in more basic methods like using slings or anything else, just at their scale, it was no object for them. For people of our scale, it would be a problem. You see, that's the difference. Okay, and did these people exist in the past? Well, obviously they did, and spanned across millennia, centuries that they were around until they were finally wiped out by cultures much later on, after all these ancient cultures died off. You know, they were eliminated in most places around the earth, except for the few holdout places And, some of them even in the reports of the giants from Greater Ancestors and Chris Leslie's website there, and the accounts of finding these giant peoples in different areas on Earth still living in historical times. So, anyway, guys, I thought you might be interested in that since I'm always crowing about how the giant peoples of ancient times were the people responsible for all the Neolithic work, Stonehenge, all that stuff. They are all responsible for that. They're responsible for the building of the pyramids and all the other cyclopean stuff around the world, all the Incan stuff and the Japanese imperial castle walls and all kind of stuff like that because they were all over the earth. These people, either the giants were all over the earth, and the people with the elongated skulls, which I think were part of that culture, just a different class of peoples that are not talked about, but and have that tradition carried on to head wanting to emulate these people, but these people were different humanoids from the past. Okay, you could think of the past more looking like Tolkien's fiction than anything, right? But, you know, to modern day archaeologists and anthropologists who are following in the footsteps of Alice Schroederlichka, the father of anthropology, okay, they can't see that, right? But even with him being disgraced and discredited, they're going to continue regurgitating and repeating what was taught to them in school about how there aren't any giants or whatever. And they keep digging these giant people up all over the world. And I've given evidence on this channel. If you go back to the worldwide population during the time periods these people could exist, it's so low. Well, if it's so rare to occur, then it's going to occur even less in lower populations in the past, where there was only like 300 million people on the entire planet in the past. How could there be so many tall skeletons dug up from the past when it's so rare? It doesn't make any sense on the ratio that it might occur when there's so much more less people in the past. You see how it doesn't work out mathematically? They don't know what they're talking about. They're giving us a story that they're not thinking through because they just going on whatever Alice Hurdlish said, and that was good enough for them. Okay, there's no such thing as giants, even though they repeatedly dig up giant skeletal remains. And that's why C.W. Saran was always referring to it, because he suspected of these ancient humanoid species existing in the past. He didn't want to leave it alone because it kept on coming up in his research about archaeology. So, anyway, guys, think about it. Think about who the stonemasons and the engineers and the worldwide engineers were from the ancient past. It wasn't us. We're not the originators. I know it's a blow to our collective egos and all that kind of stuff, but that's what the truth is. And here is the Quran to affirm it for us, okay, about who these people were and what they did. All right? Anyway, think about it, roll it around in your head a bit, okay? This makes much more sense than we just don't know who built these ancient structures in the past. Well, people of an exaggerated size did. It's much easier for them than us. Okay, we can only imagine because we're not that size. So we can't imagine. All right. Anyway, guys, think about it. Please hit the like button and please do subscribe if you're not a subscriber. We talk about some very interesting things on the channel. And be back to you real soon. Bugcat7 signing out. Peace.